like the hat. Why do I have this thing on, do you ask? Well, if you do a build like this, you'll be putting one of these on too. Back in the corporate days, when we used to get involved in a project that we knew we were over our heads and that we knew may drastically affect business performance, we'd say, put on a cowboy hat and just do it. Well, that's what this was. Building this 2950X thing with the 64 gigs of RAM and all the rest of it was a little bit of a cowboy hat experience for me because I really didn't know what to expect. I've been an Intel guy as long as I've been building computers, so to put this thing in and, you know, with the different architecture and all the cores and the different kind of RAM and all the rest of it and temps and all the different software, things that I'm not used to, there were some unexpected consequences. So I want to cover those here and then see if you guys want me to elaborate any further on some of this stuff. So the first thing that I will talk about is the RGB issue. So this board, this X399 board, has two RGB headers, and I'm an RGB fan. So I hooked up my RGBs to the header, and everything worked fine. What I found out, and this is something you can take to the bank, is that this board, and this is something that separates, I think, ASUS and ASRock right now, is that ASUS has the Aura software and it works freaking brilliantly. I had the Rampage, whatever it was, Rampage 9 formula was my last build, and that had the Aura software, and I never, ever, ever had an RGB issue, ever. It always worked perfectly. This thing, what I found out is that if you have any other RGBs on your board, period, besides what's attached to the RGB header and what the motherboard itself had, because it has built-in RGBs, you're going to have issues. So for people that have CPU fans with RGBs, people that have RAM with RGBs, in my case, I just have the 1080 Ti that had an RGB, and I think that's where the problem started. So everything was working fine. The RGBs lit up. The software was working okay. And then I installed the EVGA Precision XOC software, which allows you to mess with the RGBs on the graphics card. And then when I went back to the ASRock software, I got an instant blue screen. Like literally, I launched the software, instant blue screen. So I rebooted the machine, brought it back up, let everything settle in, hit the ASRock software again, and just boom. Not only did I get a blue screen, but all the RGBs in the whole system, and I'm talking about the RGBs on the header, the RGBs on the motherboard, they all just went white. Like these strobe lights I have hooked up in here to light this room up right now. They were so bright and just stuck on white that it lit up the whole room. I actually just opened up the case and pulled the RGBs out because it was so bright and so obnoxious. And it was really like I thought I fried something. And what I ended up doing, I uninstalled the software, I reinstalled the software, I went on some forums, I found out that it's a known issue with the ASRock motherboards, that their RGB software sucks, it's unstable, it doesn't play well with other devices in your machine that run RGB. What I ended up having to do was run a command on command prompt to rewrite the firmware of the RGB software. I don't even know where that is. I'd have to look it up. If you want it, I'll find it again. Let me know in the comments and I'll find it and put it in there. But long story short, that was what fixed it. And since then, I've been very afraid to touch I haven't even launched the EVGA Precision XOC software. And even all I did with the ASRock software was I just set the breathing and the color the way I wanted it, and I haven't touched it since. So be prepared that you're going to have RGB issues with this board if you have any other devices hooked into the board that have RGB capability. If you just use the motherboard by itself and you just hook an LED into the RGB header and you just use the ASRock software, you might be okay. But if you add any other devices that have RGB capability, forget it. You're going to have issues, so just be ready to put on the cowboy hat. Number two, RAM overclocking. So, truth be told, and this is the first time I'm admitting this on camera, I've never manually overclocked. I mean, I've overclocked all my PCs pretty much that I've had, but I've always just used the kind of the built-in software. I've never manually gone through and funny thing is here, I may do a jump cut, but this is what you're going to need. And there is a calculator. There's two things that you're going to need. There's a software called Typhoon, spelled Tiaphoon. So you're going to need that Typhoon software. There's a free version of it, which I'll link below. And what you're going to need from that is it's just going to tell you which die your RAM is using. Like if you have Samsung RAM, it's going to be the A die, the B die, the C die, the G die, whatever. You need to know what die it is, and you need to know a couple of other kind of technical settings, and you get those from the Typhoon software. Then you take those, and there's a Ryzen DRAM calculator, which is what this is, and you plug in all your values, and it spits out. You have three different. You can do like a safe, a faster, and extreme. You put those values in here. You print it out, and then you have to jump into your BIOS, and you literally have to set every single one of these settings in your thing. So when I tried to enable the XMP profile just to get the RAM to run, I spent $900 some odd dollars on this RAM, and when I enabled the XMP profile, I couldn't even load the BIOS. The BIOS wouldn't even load. I had to clear CMOS every single time, which blows away all your settings. You have to reset the freaking time. You have to reset everything. It's a pain in the ass. So I did it once, and then I ended up having to do it again, and that was a real pain. So be ready to manually overclock your RAM if you want it to actually run at the speed you paid for, which is going to be anything above 2133. And you're going to have to probably do it yourself. So there are tools out there that make it relatively easy, but it's still somewhat difficult. It's not for a total amateur. I mean, if you're building on this level, you probably have done it before or whatever, but I'm just letting you know right now you're going to have issues with the RAM, and don't even think about trying to get it over 3000 megahertz. It's not going to happen. So don't spend the money for RAM that runs at 4666. You're not going to get it that high, not with the 2950X. Just stick around 3000 megahertz or lower. I ran 2933, that's what I have in there. And I had to manually overclock it. And I started on the safe setting, and it was perfectly stable, and then I jumped to the fast setting. I haven't gone to the extreme setting. I don't really feel like I need it. But that's another issue that I ran into, another cowboy hat issue. The CPU fan is very close to the graphics card, and I'm talking like maybe a millimeter or two of clearance. Not the end of the world. I don't really see it causing issues at this point, but it's just something to know. This CPU fan, which is the the Noctua, I don't have all the number strings, but I'll put it up on the screen. It has an offset adjustment, so you could move it up if you needed to, and it's specifically done that way to clear that first PCIe slot. I didn't have to play with the offset, but I will tell you that the clearance is very minimal. But I'm not having any temp issues in the machine at all. Hey guys, speaking of temps, I just wanted to jump in here real quick. It's something I forgot to cover in the video, so I'm throwing this in the next day. If you want accurate temps, an accurate temp measurement, you're going to have to install this program, Ryzen Master, and again, I'll link it below. Your motherboard itself, if you go into the BIOS, it's going to give you the wrong temps, and a lot of the other software that you can install. I will say SpeedFan gave the correct temps, but it doesn't. It's a pretty minimal program. But all the other temperature programs I was looking at was giving me the wrong CPU temps. So you can see right now the CPU's sitting at 37 degrees Celsius because I'm actually recording video right now. And it's also giving me what our peak speeds. I do cover this later in the video, that the thing is hitting 4.2 gigahertz all the time. So you can see, I believe these are the overclocked cores, the starred ones. I don't know. I'm still learning it. I don't know exactly how it's working. But long story short, you don't need to overclock. And this one just hit 4,300 a second ago. You don't need to overclock to get 4.2, 4.3 out of the 2950X all the time. So that being said, getting back to temps here. So this thing hovers around, when I'm just idling, it idles around 28, 29C, which is what my old processor and my old computer did, so those numbers make sense to me. But when I was first looking at temps, I was seeing 60, 70 degrees C everywhere I looked, all the different programs that I was using to try to monitor the temps. So there's two dies on the chip. There's the T die, which is the temperature you actually want, and then there's the TCTL, which is the temperature that most of the things will display, and it's off by like 30 degrees Celsius. So it'll really drive you in a loop if you're trying to monitor your temps and you're seeing that you're constantly running at 60 and 70 degrees Celsius, when in reality, you're really running at, maybe 35, 37, or 40. And like I said, this system idles around 28, 29 when I'm not actually recording video or doing stuff with it. And this program as well does offer you some other modes if you want to mess with overclocking. It's got some built-in overclocking modes. It's got a gaming mode that actually shuts off half the cores because most games can't take advantage. I mean, only the most optimized games are even allowing, like an 8-core situation here. And then you can save other profiles. I haven't messed with that. Like I said, I don't think I'm going to overclock this chip at all. But I just wanted to throw it in there that if you want to monitor temperatures, Ryzen Master is the way to go. So now, back to you. Another thing that kind of pissed me off is that the TPM header, this board has a TPM header. It was one of the reasons I picked this board, and I believe I picked it over the Tai Chi for that reason. It's a 19-pin TPM header. So I bought an ASRock 19-pin TPM chip and put it in, and again, couldn't even boot to the BIOS. I had to pull it out just to get back into the BIOS. I think I even had to clear CMOS for that. So the TPM didn't work. And then the AMD processor has an FTPM, a firmware TPM, which I enabled, and Windows sees, but it doesn't like it. It doesn't want to let me enable BitLocker unless I do like a USB flash drive, which completely defeats the purpose of TPM, because the whole purpose of TPM is so that you don't have to have a secondary device or enter a secondary password. It's supposed to remember the fucking password. That's the whole point of it. So that's got me a little bit in a tiff. I haven't spent a ton of time messing with it. I may be able to get that to work. I'm sure I probably can. I'm sure I can go into the group policy editor and fix that and make it work the way I want it to. But it just is pissing me off that it just didn't work the way I assumed it would. So it just didn't work with ASRock's own TPM chip. So that was pretty lame. And then also I covered this when I was building the thing, but there is a lack of fan headers on this motherboard. Again, I think they think a lot of people are probably going for liquid cooling on this thing, but just be aware you're going to need a fan controller. Luckily enough, I have the Cooler Master Casemaker 5, which has a fan header strapped to the back, and I literally have like 5 fans plugged into it. You are going to need an external fan header for this thing. A fan controller, I'm sorry, for this build if you're planning on air cooling. If you're planning on liquid cooling, then you probably don't. But just something to be aware of. The pros, super fast performance. This thing is just tearing through its Adobe duties like a champ. The hard drive is reading at 3,500 megabytes per second and writing at 2,700 megabytes per second. So take that, SATA drives. It's really, really flying. The CPU regularly hits 4.2 gigahertz. I mean, its clock speed is 3.5 gigahertz, and then with a turbo up to 4.2. But when I'm monitoring this thing's hitting 4.2 all the time. Even when it's just idling, it's jumping up to 4.2 all the time. So you're probably not going to have to overclock it unless you want to go real extreme and you're doing like, liquid nitrogen cooling or something insane like that. But just, for the regular everyday user, you're going to be hitting, my old PC, I had to overclock to hit 4.2 gigahertz. This thing hits 4.2 constantly. So don't even worry about that unless you want to get above 4.2. I've even hit 4.3 a lot. So, so don't even worry about that. I'm not going to overclock the CPU. The Cinebench score was a 3138. The highest I've seen with a similar setup to mine was somebody hit a 3400 with theirs. So I know the record's like 10,000, but just for regular human beings that actually use their PCs as daily drivers, I think 31 to 3400 is what you can expect, and I think it's a pretty respectable score. I mean, you just go back a couple of years ago, and guys with overclocked liquid-cooled PCs were happy to hit 800 or 900. So. This one's hitting 3138, so that's the Cinebench benchmark, and I'm going to post some of those benchmarks up while this goes on. And once the initial bugs were sorted out, it took me about a week to deal with the RAM, to deal with the RGB situation. I'm still kind of playing with the TPM thing. I don't have that settled out yet. But totally stable performance. No blue screens, no hiccups, no nothing. It's running like a total champ now, and the RGBs are all working, but that did take some doing. So that's kind of I'm 2 weeks in with this build. I know I just released all those build videos, but basically, you know, the state of the state right now is 2 weeks in. The thing's a total beast. I love it. It was worth every penny. I know I'm going to get some good solid use out of it. Those were the hiccups I ran into. Be ready to manually overclock the RAM. Be ready to fight with RGB situations. Don't expect the TPM header to work very well. But other than that, total beast. And let me know if you have any questions. And thank you very much for watching.